Welcome to Parenting Different, a place where real adoption stories come to life. My name is Anna Bernacki, and this is the Parenting Different podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Parenting Different podcast. Today we have Isaac Etter with us, who is the founder and CEO of Parenting Different. I'm excited to have you here so we can talk a little bit about adoption.
I know. I'm excited to be here too. Yeah, this is going to be great.
Yes. So give us the short, I think a lot of us know who you are and know your story. Give us like the little Cliff Notes version of your story and who you are, just to kind of set the groundwork there.
Absolutely. Well, I am an adoptee. I was adopted when I was 2, and I was transracially adopted. And for most of my work in adoption, I talked about that story. I talked about the struggles to find my identity growing up in a community where I was one of the only people of color. And a lot of my early work was built around helping families navigate transracial adoption. And in the mix of doing that, I ended up writing a small guidebook for transracial adoptive parents, which really laid out the exact things that parents can do at each stage. And I was able to help not only states, but agencies transform how they think about preparing families for transracial adoption. And in the mix of being inside of agencies, being inside of these systems, really felt like there was a need for better post adoption support. And so, out of seeing that need and seeing the conversation, I launched my first company, which was Identity. And then, out of what we saw at Identity, we launched Parenting Different. And so, it's been kind of a road of trying to see the needs in education, the gaps in education, and fill them as creatively as possible in the ways that I think parents want it. And usually, agencies need it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what exactly, I think a lot of times I get this question and there's a lot of confusion. What
Yeah.
exactly is identity and what exactly is parenting different?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Identity, we work with states and agencies exclusively to enhance post adoption support. And so we run post adoption trainings, programmings, and provide resources to states and agencies that they distribute throughout their state or agency. It's been a very cool way to help post adoption support look better. It was my original mission was to make post adoption support better. And the gap that was happening very consistently on the identity front was that we were putting out a lot of stuff, we were creating a lot of stuff, and very often families outside of those agencies in those states had almost no way to access it. There was a way to get like my guide on Amazon, but it wasn't. We didn't really market it that much, and so the goal in Parenting Different was to create a really accessible way for parents who maybe aren't getting post adoption services through any of our agency partners to be able to receive weekly resources, support, and have access to like the products we've created that have mostly been distributed on a statewide level. You know, on identity side, we sold hundreds and hundreds of our guides at one time to states and agencies, and so we've done large orders on that side, but literally families, if you weren't in that state, if you weren't a part of that agency, if you didn't know how to get it through those places, you were never going to see our stuff. And so Parenting Different allows us to be with families. It's a great opportunity, I think, for somebody like you who's great with parents, who is an adoptive parent, who is an adoptee, to be right there in the daily journey with adoptive parents. And that's what I love about what we're doing at Parenting Different versus Identity.
Yeah, for sure. So we talk about the gaps, right? What were those gaps that you were seeing that adoptive parents maybe they don't see the gaps because they're in the thick of it? So what are those gaps that adoptive parents you were seeing it with adoptive parents in their post adoption support?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the struggles are usually not naive for parents. This all started in transracial adoption, and so those needs are usually very loud. So a
Very
lot of
true.
the challenges that we see are quiet are actually more on the trauma informed parenting side. We can definitely talk about those, but at least in terms of like origin of thinking about work, the transracial needs were very loud. You know, when I would do a webinar, when I would do an in person training, no matter where I was, I would get the same assortment of questions. agencies all had the same thing, all the same questions, the same issues, and also the same confusion on where to go. There's a range of places that you can go to get racial dialogue, and not all of those are applicable to adoption necessarily.
Yeah.
And so it was a way for me to kind of take, I think, this experience I had as an activist working in Lancaster in our community, and my kind of entrepreneurial spirit and ability to speak to create something really unique just for adoptive parents who are transracially adopting. And that was the first need, that was the first gap. And those came from, how do I talk about race? How do I find community for my child? When I first started in this space, I mean, there were, going to a barbershop was even kind of like new information. I mean, not really, but it felt like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was saying stuff that we hear all the time now, and there were a lot of people who hadn't heard it. A lot of transracial adoption education as a whole has changed dramatically in the last like 8 years of me being in the space. That's from culture, society, but then I think also the impact of me and many other adoptees who have been very vocal in the space. And thankfully, in that change, some of the things that I created at Identity became a part of how agencies and some states were thinking about training their families on transracial adoption. My guidebook became a part of how some people think about training their families. Um, the docu-series we created on my family story became a crucial part of training and education as well. So many of the things that we put out into the world around transracial adoption became key parts of organizations, became lessons in their curriculum or assignments in their training. And that led, I think, to the doorway of having more conversations. As we grew and more agencies and states were embracing the transracial stuff, we were just asking about more of their needs. And that really opened the door to hosting a multitude of trainings, not just transracial, but pretty much trainings on as many topics as they would need. And that's how
Yeah.
the Identity Partners program really kind of took off. It took off between agencies ordering kind of bulk orders of our books, but then also us providing tailored training that they would need on pretty much any topic. And so our adoption after infertility stuff came out of that. Our hair care stuff came out of that. And now our trauma informed parenting stuff has come out of that as well. And so we continue to try and take areas where we're seeing gaps and needs, and continue to create things that are really interesting. And we hope to kind of keep going in terms of like trauma informed parenting and open adoption as kind of some of our next really big pillars in how we're transforming adoption education.
Yeah, for sure. When you talk to these adoptive parents and you're in front of them and face to face with them, what
Yeah.
do you think they most misunderstand about adoptees? Like, what is the most common misconception?
Yeah, I think the most common misconception is probably that if they do everything right, there won't be any issues, or there won't be um, struggles, there won't be grief, there won't be loss. I think that it's you obviously, a lot of parents, they don't want to see their kids struggle, they don't want their kids to hurt.
Right.
And I think a lot of times parents come into training either on the pre-adoptive and definitely on the post-adoptive side, hoping that they're going to find answers that fix. And there is a lot of things that you can fix. Like there's a lot of things that you can make better, and create a better environment for your child, and help them
Sure.
feel more safe. But you really can't fix the grief and loss that comes with adoption. What you can do is you can help your child navigate it. And in that, you create the bond and attachment that I think people are looking for and trying to fix it. And so that's the thing that I see most of the time is just the desire to fix something that can't be fixed. But if you looked at it as more how can I walk alongside my child better? It's likely the goal that you were trying to get to would actually be achieved, which is attachment, bonding, feeling secure, feeling like you're a family.
Well, and I think often a lot of adoptive parents think that if I just ignore this or if I
Yeah.
don't talk about it, then it won't be a thing and then
Yeah.
we won't have to navigate it. But the reality
Yeah.
is it's a thing and it
Oh, yeah.
always will
100%.
be. And so if you learn to sit with them in it and navigate it with them, that creates the bond, not ignoring it and pretending it
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
exist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to really embrace open conversations and trying to not let your child's feelings become a representation of like your parenting. It's because it's really not about you. Usually, their feelings are a byproduct of their own emotional state, nothing
Yeah.
necessarily to do with your parenting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's so important for adoptive parents to understand too, as someone who's now been on both sides of it, right? Like I have seen both sides and I have a lot more grace for adoptive parents now that I am an adoptive parent. But there are a lot
Yeah,
of things too that I can fully acknowledge. Like, no, there is a pain that will always be there. It will always hurt to be adopted, right? That's never going to go away. And I'm always going to struggle with some of those things, but I can also always do better. And just because I am also an adoptee does not mean that I am a perfect parent by any
yeah,
stretch of the
absolutely.
imagination. I'm still learning and growing and constantly evolving in my parenting journey.
Yeah,
But I think that is also another pressure that adoptive parents, even some parents want to ignore that there's trauma with adoption. But then the ones who do acknowledge it and see it feel this sense of having to be perfect parents and that they
yeah,
have to have this level of perfectionism. And that's way too much pressure and not a
agreed.
reality. Like it does, you can't, you just
Yeah.
can't. So, what would you say to those parents who are struggling with that perfectionism? Like, I know that there's grief and trauma and pain here, and I feel like I don't have any room to mess up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there is really no such thing as the perfect parent. I think that's
Right.
the first one that even outside of adoption, there's really no perfect parent. And I think that usually, what kids are looking for is not necessarily perfect parents, but I think kids are looking for a lot of understanding. They're looking for a lot of
Yes.
um, especially kids that I think are adopted, they're already kind of navigating confusing feelings. So they're not necessarily looking for perfect parents. They're trying to process something that they don't fully understand. And so it's, I think sometimes it's easy to have the wrong like metrics, if that makes sense. Like it's easy
Yes.
to have the wrong goalpost. Whereas like the better goalpost is just how can I create the home that my child feels safest to express their feelings in. And in that, you kind of create, you know, in a sense, maybe the perfect home for adoptees, right? You wouldn't be the perfect
Right.
parent, but you could create a home that's like more ideal for adoptees, which is a home where communication is free, where questions are encouraged, where curiosity is encouraged. And that becomes, I think that becomes what people are looking for in this idea of being a perfect parent. Um, yeah, I think there's just no such thing as the perfect parent, and
Right.
on any front. And so, if you can kind of try to be the most curious parent, the most open parent, um, I think you'll kind of get a lot further. And really,
Yeah.
at the root of what's happening with a lot of these situations is like there's a longing for connection. There's a longing for feeling like you're doing a good job as a parent. There could be a longing for attachment, depending on how your child has maybe pushed you away or maybe
Right.
has not accepted attachment. And so, really rethinking like you're not going to gain that attachment by being more like kind of quote unquote perfect. You're going to gain it by trying to understand them more, trying to make more space for their feelings, trying to figure out what they could be internally navigating and how to help them process it. And that, in a sense, I think is going to be the actual kind of quote unquote perfect state you're looking for. It's never going to
Yeah.
be perfect, but it's closer to what parents I think are actually shooting for when they're searching for like these perfect answers or this perfect house, this perfect environment. You're searching for that feeling of family that you went into adoption with. And I think it's just created another way.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's so important within that is repair. And I say this
Yeah.
all the time, but
Okay.
we're not going to be perfect. We are going to mess up. But when you can humble yourself and go to your child and say, hey, I messed up and I'm really sorry. Can we work together to make this better? What do you need from me? How can I fix this? And that builds a connection and a bond that maybe comes from a place again of somebody got hurt and somebody did wrong, but it's opening, choosing to repair it rather than ignore it and be like, well, I'm the adult, so deal with
Yeah.
it. Choosing to repair that is creating a moment of connection when they are now seeing you're going to them
Yeah.
humbly and asking them for forgiveness, and it changes the dynamic a little bit, and it creates a
100%.
connection that can be really beautiful in that moment.
Oh no, 100%. I mean, this is why the trauma informed parenting stuff I think becomes so important, and why every adoptive parent, whether they would consider their child, you know, experiencing a ton of trauma or not, should take it, because adoption
Yeah,
in of itself has some level of trauma. And so
absolutely.
when you think about trauma informed parenting, I think a lot of parents are hesitant because they think, well, my kid wasn't in foster care, it was an infant adoption. But a lot of these principles of trauma informed parenting, or TBRI, really apply to most parenting, I think, to be honest, but then
Yeah,
especially any adoptive parenting. And repair is one of those things that's really important. How to think about repair, how to think about your communication and repair, and what repair actually does, especially for adoptees who struggle with rejection sensitivity, abandonment issues, things like that. Repair actually becomes a really critical part, I think, of parenting adoptees, no matter when they were adopted.
right. Very, very true. And I think it's really important too to touch on that, even if you don't think your child had a lot of trauma. Think
Yep.
about the fact they have, I mean, the mother had increased cortisol because she made an adoption plan. Like, there was something in her
Yeah.
life that caused her to make an adoption plan, and that causes so much stress and anxiety, and who knows what that circumstance was that could also contribute to that. So it's so important to understand that even in a quote unquote perfect scenario and a perfect adoption story where you're going and getting them straight from the hospital, there's still going to be trauma, and
Oh,
there's
absolutely.
no way around that at all.
Yep, no way around it. And I think the that helps reframe behaviors. I think going into that is helpful because it helps reframe a lot of behaviors, which is usually kind of the second place that a lot of adoptive parents get um, tripped up. Is that they can have like a really good infancy. If they adopt an infant, they can have really good toddler
Mhm.
years. They can have really good early elementary years, even. And then when behavioral issues come up, anger shows up, depression shows up, anxiety shows up at an early age. Um,
Yeah,
there's usually a lot of confusion, or thoughts of like troubled kids, when usually it's actually just a byproduct of trauma, grief, and loss. And understanding these things can help you reframe your behavior in those times and also prepare for them differently.
yeah,
And so these are the things I think it's why adoption education becomes so important. Obviously, post adoption support is really important, and like honored to try to be a part of making that better. But I mean, it's especially why adoption education and narratives and things are so important, because that I see a lot of, for years I saw parents get tripped up on the transracial, thinking that if they adopted a kid of any race, it wouldn't matter; they would just blend right into their family, and that was
yeah,
obviously killed immediately. But they also found that in that, their child's behavioral issues, mental health, things like that also became very apparent, and were tripped up and confused by that, because, and again, adoption narratives and things that have been said for years is that a loving home kind of cures all.
right.
And there are many kids that need a loving home. Like there are many that is a good thing to happen for many kids. But even in that, kids still live with this grief, they still live with this loss, and the translation of that for young people has always been behavioral.
Yeah,
It can be behavioral in the negative, and it can be behavioral in the overly positive, in the overachievers. And this is, I think, a really important thing for adoptive parents to be mindful of, because it comes out at some point. You
Yes.
know, it all comes out from underneath at some point. And I think adoptive parents, they get a little shocked when their adult adopted child expresses pain around adoption, but at 8 they were acting out in class. They were never paying attention. They were always in detention. As a teenager, they were extremely depressed, anxiety. And
Right.
then as a mid 20-year-old, they're like, well, I've really always struggled with adoption. And the adoptive parents are shocked, but those were actually the signs. They were there all
Right.
along. And with the right education, with the right knowledge, I think parents can be those homes that they're trying to be at the beginning. Those homes where adoptees feel safe.
Yeah. Well, and I think for both you and I too, becoming parents
Oh yeah,
rips
huge.
things wide open. And
Oh yeah,
so that's another
absolutely.
thing. When an adoptee becomes a parent, that's another huge life change that is going
Yeah.
to completely flip their world upside down.
Yeah, and it's going to bring new things, I think, too, to the
Yeah.
surface around their own story, like healing in many cases. Like I hear many
Yes.
adoptees have a lot of healing, and I certainly had a lot of healing. But it does also bring up new questions about your story and new things. And um, yeah, I talk to a lot of adoptive parents who are becoming grandparents, and they're watching that happen. They're watching not only the healing in their child in this new phase, but they're also watching struggle.
Yeah.
And I think it's another um, ode to something my mom says, which is about grief being cyclical.
Yes.
That that adoption has this lifelong cyclical grief, and in that moment of becoming a parent, you both find healing and you also find sadness. And I think that's it's a really interesting experience for adopted people.
Yeah, it really is. It's something that I think a lot of adoptees don't even expect. Like
Yeah,
I
definitely
didn't.
not.
I didn't expect
Oh yeah,
that. And obviously my story is very different from yours. I became a parent through adoption. And so that is unique, but it still just rocked my world. And
yeah,
so that was very I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't prepared for it, and I didn't
yeah,
have anyone around me who had the knowledge that this could change everything for me. And so I didn't have that support there
yeah,
ready. And it was a
yeah.
huge challenge.
Oh no, I mean, I'm sure. I mean, I think it's a huge. I think it's a huge challenge for all adoptees to some degree or another. Just because
Yeah.
even if you feel like you've processed your adoption, it definitely brings it up. And
Oh, for sure.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think you can be an adoptee and have a child and not think about adoption, just because that's the moment.
Right. For sure. Absolutely. There was something you said earlier about adoptive parents having curiosity.
Mm.
What does that look like and why is that so important?
Yeah, adoptive parents having curiosity, I think can go back to a conversation about behavior, but maybe it can start in trying to think about their child's experience outside of themselves first. So putting themselves in an adoptee's shoe first. But then I think curiosity throughout parenting is being willing to ask questions to adoptees, to your child, rather than wondering. Like I talk to a lot of parents all the time where I wonder if they have any questions about their birth parents. And I'm like, oh, I wonder
Mhm.
if you should just ask them. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And and like and for some people, I know there's anxiety, there's nerves, and that's all. It's all valid. But a lot of times, like curiosity, I think an adoptive parent is just instead of like wondering and like kind of speculating with your partner or going to the trainings and asking, like just creating a house where like you could ask your child, and your child may in the next week or in the next month feel safe to come to you and say, "You asked me if I was thinking about my birth parent last month. I said no, but now I am." And
Right.
so it's creating that environment where your curiosity is not kind of hidden, but then also as they get curious because you're willing to ask questions, because you're willing to create openness, their curiosity then also gets encouraged as a byproduct. Because you've opened up the door, because you've asked the questions, even if they shut down the question first, it leaves the door open to restart it because you started it. They didn't start it.
Right.
And a lot of adoptees won't start it. I think a lot of adoptees, especially as they get older, maybe when they're younger, they're more willing to, but as they get older into elementary years, are less likely to open up the conversation. And so, you opening up the conversation, having your own curiosity that's expressed to them early, as they get more curious and as they get older, if the doorway is already open, it's open. If it's not open, I think it gets harder to open as the child gets older. And by the time a child is in their teen years, I think it becomes like extremely hard to open, just because teenagers are already like they're already not super open to conversations. Like they're already not
Right.
super expressive all the time. And so the longer you wait for your home to be this place where questions are encouraged, where conversations about adoption are encouraged, then the harder it is when your child will probably need it most, which is as they inch towards adulthood.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important to ask open-ended questions because yes or no
Oh yeah,
questions are very easy to shut down,
yeah,
where or just answer and then you're like, "Oh, wait, now what do I say?" And it gets
yeah,
awkward and they will
100%.
pick up on that awkwardness in point 0.2 seconds. And that
Yep,
awkwardness can sometimes be interpreted as it's not safe
yeah,
because adoptees don't we don't want to hurt our adoptive parents. We're not
no,
trying to. And so if we sense any sort of this is not safe to ask because we will hurt them, we won't.
oh
So
yeah,
ask
100%.
those open-ended questions. And I think that's something really cool that we've been able to do at Parenting Different is create resources around some of these things. As I know that's one of
Oh yeah,
the resources we've been able to create is what are some good
100%.
questions to ask our kids and to
Mhm.
start those conversations and open it so it's not just a yes or no and then what, but it leads that conversation into a deeper place and you can truly get to understand and learn where is your child's brain at, because some adoptees will be like, no, I'm good. I'm truly not thinking about them right now. And then
Right.
I think that's rare. Most adoptees are going to be like, no, I think about them every single day. I wonder
Yeah,
where they're at. I wonder
absolutely.
what they're doing. And if you act shocked by that or like it's like, oh, wait, you need to be prepared and have those deep conversations because that's going to be such a relief for them too, to not have to carry the weight of all of that
Yeah,
because we do.
it's a weight.
We
It's a
carry
weight.
a lot of weight surrounding
Oh,
our birth family.
yeah, absolutely. No, I mean I couldn't agree more. I mean these conversations they also take weight off the child. And I think that's a really good point to mention. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I had, and I don't know about you, but I always wrap myself out on this one and I sound crazy. But I had like the most extravagant ghost kingdom that has ever existed. And but I was so obsessed. I didn't know much of anything. And I was told so many positive, which is not bad. I'm glad
Right.
that I was told positive things about my birth mom. But because it was a closed adoption and I didn't know anything and I didn't have any answers to any of my questions, it created this mindset of, well, everything will be perfect once I'm with her. She will complete my life. And so I just had this whole imaginary world that when things were hard, I would go into my room and I would enter this other world where I was with my biological family and everything was perfect and great and wonderful. And nobody ever knew that. Nobody
Wow.
in my real life ever knew that that was a
Wow.
thought process of mine at all. And I carried that with me. And then I carried that into meeting my biological
Yeah.
family, which turned into a disaster because I had unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
So I think it's
Absolutely.
so important to understand where your kids' minds are at for
Absolutely.
1,000 different reasons.
Oh no. Yeah, I mean I agree. I mean it's the Ghost Kingdom thing and the unrealistic expectations I think are also very like normal adoptee
Hmm.
experiences, because usually I think adoptees end up in one camp or another about their parents. They either think overly positive or they think overly negative.
Yeah.
And so this can be setting your child up for failure, if you don't
Yeah.
have conversations about adoptees and humanize their birth parents. I mean, that's another big one. I mean, my parents were good about humanizing my birth parents, and so I really appreciated that. It wasn't, it wasn't all about like, her not being able to provide. You know what I mean? It wasn't all
Yeah.
about her, being in a negative state. And so I think that that's another thing to think about when you think about curiosity and open conversations is that you're also setting them up for a human experience with their birth parents. And human experiences are imperfect, right? Their
Right.
relationships are imperfect. All these things create a lot of struggle and a lot of work. Like the relationships, especially if you think about birth parent and adoptive relationships, tend to take a lot of work because they're relationships that essentially in many cases haven't really existed for 18 or so years, right?
Right.
And so the way that we help adoptees process their story, understand their story, go into the next phase of meeting their birth parents, I think really matters a lot. And it's all about conversations and humanizing and not making their story like overly simplistic. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Their story is not just your mother couldn't provide and she placed you for adoption. Um, that is a version of the story we maybe tell a 3 year old, but by the time our children are teenagers, they need to understand the different assortment of complications that can lead to placement,
Yeah.
the humanization of their birth parents, how their birth parents probably feel and struggle themselves with the decision, and like how they can process and heal from their own feelings about their birth parents' choice.
Right. And I think it's so important too to continue to have that age appropriate honesty. I know we both talk about that
Yeah.
all the time.
Oh
Age
yeah.
appropriate honesty. And adoptees, we already carry the grief of relinquishment. Like
Yeah.
we can carry hard things. And I think adoptive parents are trying to protect their children from a lot, but we can carry a lot of weight.
Yeah.
But what we can't carry is secrets
Yeah.
or not having access to the full truth. And especially as we're getting close to that age of reuniting with our birth parents, or but even in the case of an open adoption, so many open adoptions are what, a few visits a year, maybe holidays, birthdays. That's not a real relationship. And so still as they're turning 18, they're now going to take over that relationship themselves and how learning how to navigate that. So even in the case of an open adoption, these concepts still apply.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think these concepts apply to all adoptions, regardless.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the fundamentals. I think of why trauma informed parenting principles have become so crucial to adoption education, and we've seen that across pretty much everywhere. But also why openness in adoption is becoming more regular, and the ideas of what openness actually means
yeah,
beyond just open adoption. And what you're talking about right now is kind of that layer of openness and adoption that I've seen personally a lot more adoption agencies embracing. Whether they're doing it perfectly, obviously, it's complicated, and
right,
maybe parents need more. And I think that that's probably a sentiment across the board is that parents need more before adopting. But I do hear this conversation happening, which I think is really good because at least parents are walking into it with a little more of eyes wide open before I think it kind of hits the fan for them in these early
right.
elementary years.
Yeah, for sure. So why do you believe education and specifically community? I mean, we talked a little bit about why education is so important, and then community and being able to share stories. Why do you think that is so important for adoptive parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think the educational piece is kind of it might be clear from the conversation, which is that like there's
Yeah,
a gap in understanding. There's a gap in narrative. Even though the narrative I think around adoption is getting better, and we are I think as a culture becoming more understanding and realistic about how adoption can have an impact on somebody. I do think what that means in your parenting is still a gap. What that means in your friendship is still a gap. What that means in your possible romantic relationship with an adoptee is still a gap in understanding. And so,
Right.
even though we might have an understanding as a culture more now that adoption involves loss, which we didn't used to have, um, we do still have a lot of gaps in how that translates into knowing and your relationships with adoptees, no matter what they are. And so I think the education we're doing on the parent side becomes critically important because parents set a foundation for the rest of our lives. And so, how your adoptive parents create openness, create emotional safety, create an ability for you to talk about your feelings, create an ability for you to understand repair, as we talked about. So,
Mhm.
ruptures when you maybe spiral out of control and how to move that into repair. All these things actually become critical life skills for adoptees in the next phase. And
Yeah.
so, what I think we do in education is not actually just like making adoptive parents better. I think we're reshaping a generation of adoptees, and I think
Mhm.
that's really kind of like some of the more important side of it. I mean, what we're doing is we're changing the experience adoptees are having at home in their homes, and will subsequently transform the relationships and experiences adult adoptees have in their adult lives. Most of us have gone out into the adult world not having really thought, processed, and understood our adoptions, our grief, and our loss, and
Right.
it becomes the struggle of our early adult life, the relationships we mess up, the people we hurt,
Yeah.
the ways in which we don't control our emotions, the way we try to learn and understand ourselves. Some of this is very normal young adult behavior, but some of it can be, I think, avoided by having parents who have always helped you understand and process how grief and loss could be showing up in your life.
Right. Well, and I
And
think
so,
sometimes it's magnified in
totally
adoptees.
magnified.
So
Yeah,
while it
totally.
might on the surface be, okay, yes, this is normal,
Yeah.
it's magnified.
It's magnified. What we see is higher divorce rates. We see
Mhm.
higher mental health issues. We see suicide. We see all these
Yeah.
things in adoptees, and so they are larger magnifications of things that are obviously happening in society. But I do wonder if we would see those numbers go down if children were just growing up in homes where they felt understood, where they felt seen, where they felt heard, where they felt valued.
Yeah.
And I do think that that is the case. I think when I sit with adoptees, I'm hearing a lot of grief. I'm hearing a lot of loss. And in their grief and loss, they're also feeling a lot of guilt because they never felt like they could talk to their parents about it. They never felt like their feelings were also right or valid. So they always felt wrong for their feelings also.
Yeah.
And somebody feeling wrong for their feelings as a child will almost indefinitely feel wrong for their feelings as an adult, which means that
Yeah.
when your partners hurt you, when friends hurt you, when things happen, your feelings are always associated with being wrong. And so when we create different home environments and ways for parents to open these conversations up for adoptees, I'm really almost always thinking 20 years out to okay, if they learn how to process their feelings and emotions and that their feelings and emotions are safe younger, will the experience, and ideally it should be the experience that in their adult life they'll be able to translate that a lot healthier. And when I talk to my friends who grew up in like healthy homes where their feelings and emotions were talked about in the biological settings, I notice the difference between them and me and how
Mhm.
confident they feel in their own emotions. And so the goal I think in a lot of education and why it's so important is because it can fundamentally change the future for adoptees.
Yeah.
And community, I think, is just a byproduct of how education becomes action. It's very easy for us to understand things, hear things, in a sense, learn things, but still not necessarily take them into action. And I think
Right.
community becomes a layer of accountability actually for us. And that doesn't always look like adoptive parent community, but I think adoptive parent community can be a really important layer of not only help in your journey, but also accountability in your journey to keep going on the days that it's hard.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also important too because it is different, right? It's not the same as raising biological children.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we just need that validation because you're walking into it and you're going, my kids don't do that. My kids are different. Our home looks different. And having that validation with other adoptive parents to say, no, this is normal in our world. And this is how we've navigated it. And maybe you could try this. And I think sometimes it's just that validation and brainstorming together is so
Yep.
helpful because if an adult, we always say a dysregulated adult can't help regulate a child, right? Well, if
Yep.
we're so overwhelmed because our world is so different, then we're not going to be parenting effectively. So, as we
Oh no.
have to step into those spaces and be around people like us who are navigating this same journey so that we can be better adults and more regulated adults so that we can help our children navigate their adoption stories as well.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, that's the goal, is that you can regulate yourself, raise regulated children who raise regulated children. I mean, a lot of this stuff is also intergenerational. And so you can also
For
think about it that
sure.
way, is that, you reshape a form of generational trauma, which a lot of adoption is a byproduct of generational issues, poverty, many times foster care, many times adoption, birth mothers who were
Mhm.
adopted, you know what I mean, who are now
Yeah,
birth mothers, you know what I mean? And so a lot of
right.
this stuff can also be intergenerational healing. And so that's another good way to think about it as well.
Right, we're setting up the future generations for success. And we talk a lot about cycle breaking, but really what is cycle breaking? Cycle breaking is
Yeah.
creating a different future for the future generations.
100%. Absolutely.
So, as we finish up here, what is if a parent is listening has no idea who parenting different is, no idea, they are overwhelmed. They're thinking about adopting or they're in it in the thick of it and they're overwhelmed. Why should they come join Parenting Different?
Well, I think first off, it's probably going to be one of the few spaces for adoptive parents that is going to be excessively giving. And I think that's part of my heart in Parenting Different, is that Parenting Different is a space for us to give to parents. It's not we don't we sell our guidebooks, but we really don't do a lot of selling at Parenting Different. We are doing a lot of giving. We make this podcast, we make free resources, we send encouragement.
Mhm.
And the goal of Parenting Different is to feel safe, to feel like the community, and to feel understood. And so Parenting Different is a free newsletter. So I think that one of the main reasons to come is that you don't really have anything to lose, and you
Yeah,
have pretty much everything to gain. Our goal is that each and every stage that you go down, you would find something new that applies to you. I know that I've said some things in this podcast that are going to really hit home right now, and there are probably some things that when you think back in 5 years, they're going to become applicable.
right.
And that's really, I think, the goal of being a part of something like Parenting Different, and what I've seen on the other side of our work at Identity, which is that having these resources, having them at your fingertips, makes a huge difference when it matters. And so I
Absolutely.
would hope that by Parenting Different being something that's free and available to all parents, regardless of if their agency works with us or not, it becomes that place that you can always say, oh man, I got an email a month ago. It didn't apply to me at all. That resource didn't apply to me at all, but now it does. You can go back in your inbox and get that free resource. And I hope that that's what you're getting out of Parenting Different, is not only the ability to feel seen, but also the ability to feel like you have the resource that you need when you need it.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And thanks for creating such an incredible resource here for adoptive parents.
Yeah, thanks for being a part of it.